Footprints in the Sand. I have 3 rules in my life. 1. Always pet a friendly dog. 2. Never chew gum in the ballet studio. 3. Never rise before the sun. So why was I awake before dawn? Me. There was no glimmer of light around my bedroom window shade, just a lighter shade of gray. I tossed onto my side, relishing the feel of my silky sea green sheets, willing myself to go back to sleep. I turned the other way, bunched my pillow, and closed my eyes. Nope, not sleepy. Well, there was nothing for it. I stretched and decided to channel my relentlessly cheerful Aunt Gully and look on the bright side. I had time for a swim. Business had been so brisk at her Lazy Mermaid lobster shack, I hadn't had any beach time in weeks. Before I had a chance to talk myself out of it, I slipped into a swimsuit, grabbed my phone and a towel, and jogged down to the beach. Aunt Gully's cottage was a short walk from our neighborhood's quarter-mile of sand, Kidda Beach. Like most New England beaches, it was rocky and pocket-sized. But there was a gentle slope of sugary sand with a great view of Long Island Sound and Little Harvey's Light. The name was pronounced Kitty and was where many Mystic Bay kids learned to swim. It was a very bare-bones beach, unspoiled. The only concessions an outdoor shower and a trash can by a small parking area. As I arrived, pink dawn light stretched across the horizon and spilled into the water where a few fishing boats bobbed in the distance. The light breeze was already warm, and not another soul walked the beach. Perfect. I tossed my towel onto the sand and was surprised to see a line of footprints so large I put my foot next to one and laughed. These were made by some impressively large feet. My size 8 foot isn't exactly tiny, and it was about half the size of the print in the sand. The line of footprints led directly into the ocean. I left my phone on my towel and followed them, noting that the shape of the prints changed the closer they got to the water. The weight shifted to the ball of the foot. Someone had run full speed into the water. I cast a glance down the beach. There was no beach chair, no towel, no umbrella, just empty sand and a strip of dark green seaweed that marked the high tide line. I scanned the ocean for the footprint's owner, squinting against the sunlight that now glittered on the gentle waves. The ocean was calm, and I saw no one swimming, no head or arm breaking the surface, nothing except those far-off fishing boats. I did a running dive into the cool water and swam the length of the beach, then flipped onto my back and let the tranquil swells carry me. I wondered if the guy, it had to be a man with footprints that large, was training for the weekend's Mystic Bay Triathlon. The triathlon was a mile swim, 10-mile run, and 20-mile bike ride. I splashed up the sand and walked the length of the beach, enjoying the feel of the water lapping over my toes. I returned to where I'd started, but no supersized footprints leaving the water crossed mine. Familiar voices pulled me from my examination of the prints. Allie housed the water. Aunt Gully and her chum Aggie Weatherben, owner of Fairweather Antiques, crossed the sand toward me. The lifelong friends were an odd couple. Aunt Gully short and curvy, Aggie tall and angular. While Aunt Gully was outgoing and talkative, Aggie was reserved and given to New England reticence. Both wore plastic swim caps. Aggie's navy blue to match her no-nonsense one-piece. Aunt Gully's a bright pink dotted with plastic flowers that matched her tropical print swim dress. Look at this footprint. I lined up my foot next to it. Who knew Bigfoot could swim? Aunt Gully laughed. It's odd. I pointed. The prints go out, but there are none returning. And I don't see anyone out there. Aggie windmilled her arms and lifted her knees in a warm-up march, stepped gingerly into the water, and sank in with a sigh. Hard for a swimmer to get in trouble here. The water's always calm. Aunt Gully walked alongside me, looking at the footprints. Looks like he got a running start into the water, she said. Like at the polar plunge you crazy people do in January. I shivered at the memory of diving into the frigid waves on New Year's Day. Good point. If someone were running into the water, it means they're a confident swimmer. One of those triathloners, Aggie called. By the way, My nephew's coming this weekend to do the triathlon. Aggie had an inexhaustible supply of nephews she was always trying to set me up with. I tried to think of a response that wasn't, "Thanks for the warning." I made a non-committal sound as I picked up my things, shook the sand off my towel, and tucked it around me. A glint at the waterline caught my eye, and I stepped into the shallow water to see what it was. I plunged my hand in and swooped up a smooth, metal object. "Sea glass?" Aunt Gully asked. I swished the sand-encrusted object in the water to rinse it off and turned it in my palm, my surprise turning to wonder. It was a ring with a gold setting holding a huge diamond, encircled by a dozen smaller diamonds. It was the biggest gem I'd ever seen. I held out the ring and breathed. "Look at this." Aunt Gully whistled. "What a rock." Aggie side-stroked over to us and plucked the ring from my fingers. "I see a lot of vintage jewelry at the shop." She hefted the ring, then squinted at it. "That is a rock. Halo setting. Nice." "It's so big it looks fake," I said. Aggie handed me the ring. "I need my glasses and my jeweler's loupe to be sure, but it's not bad." Aggie's New England understatement made me raise my eyebrows. "Not bad? It's gorgeous." I slid it onto my ring finger, then took it off and read the inscription. 50 beautiful years. JS to MS. "You don't think Bigfoot lost it?" Aggie said. "That ring barely fits me." "I can't imagine it would fit Bigfoot," I said. "I'll post on NeighborNet," Aggie said, naming the neighborhood website. Found. One heck of a ring. "I'll ask around, too," Aunt Gully said. "Since you're heading back," she lowered her voice, "hide it in the sugar bowl for now." We looked at the ring glittering in my palm and sighed. "If only I were less honest," Aunt Gully said. We laughed. "Let's think," I said. "Someone married for 50 years. They'd be probably in their 70s or so." Aunt Gully tapped her chin. I wrapped my towel more tightly around me. "Who has the initials MS, who's the right age and swims at this beach?" "Marion Santiago," Aggie said. "Moved to Fort Myers 2 years ago." Aunt Gully was already moving slowly through the water, head down, scanning the sandy bottom. Aggie joined her. I knew they'd mentally thumbed through years of friends, relatives, friends of friends, business associates, old school chums, customers, and acquaintances as they looked for more jewelry. My thoughts returned to the footprints as I turned to go. The incoming tide had been busy erasing them. I put my foot next to the last remaining print, snapped a photo, then wrapped my hand more firmly around the ring and headed home. I did put the ring in the pink depression glass sugar bowl on the kitchen table. I felt silly, but if anything happened to me, at least Aunt Gully and Aggie knew where it was. I dashed through a shower and dressed in my work uniform, a pink t-shirt with strategically placed red seashells and khaki shorts, thinking about the ring and trying to imagine the woman who owned it. Our neighborhood was home to a few blocks of rustic cottages that had originally been built by fishermen and lobstermen working the fleets out of Noink and Mystic in the early 1900s. Aunt Gully's snug Cape Cod-style home, Gull's Nest, was typical, shingled with cedar that had grayed in years of exposure to the elements, with a broad front porch to catch the breeze. Every home had a share in Kidda Beach, and I'd grown up swimming there. Who in our neighborhood would own an elegant ring like this? I took the ring out of the bowl and brushed sugar crystals from the sparkling gems. The diamond was huge, meant to be noticed. Glamorous. I felt that JS was celebrating more than 50 years of marriage. He'd made it, perhaps in business, and wanted this splashy symbol of success for his spouse. This was more in keeping with Fox Point, a neighboring village that had always been a vacation escape for well-to-do summer people or folks renting a vacation home. The summer people probably wouldn't be on NeighborNet. I snapped a pic and sent it to my friend Bronwyn, a police trainee, then put the ring back in the sugar bowl and replaced the lid. Outside, the door to the shower creaked and the sound of running water and Aunt Gully singing Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid streamed through the open kitchen window. Bronwyn called me immediately. "Are you engaged? Have you been keeping secrets from your best friends?" I laughed. "No." "Thank goodness," Bronwyn said. I thought you'd said your last date struck out. I cringed. Very funny. Aggie's latest nephew, Brad the baseball fanatic, had buttonholed me for 3 hours of baseball statistics. Hope I'm not interrupting any exciting arrests. I wish, Bronwyn said. I wanted to ask if anyone had reported a missing ring. I explained how I'd found it. I'll check in and ask. Thanks. Aunt Gully burst in, wrapped in a leopard print towel. I thought of an MS, she crowed. Mary Sabino, been married quite a while, right age? Aunt Gully bustled into her bedroom to dress. 8 kids. I can't see her with a fancy ring like that, but you never know. Maybe her husband's plumbing business is doing better than I thought. We can swing by on the way to the shack, I said. That was one good thing about insomnia. It got you up early, so you could get a lot done. A few minutes later, Aunt Gully took the ring out of the bowl and held it up to the light streaming over the yellow gingham cafe curtains. She returned it to the bowl with a sigh. When she gets a chance, Aggie's going to stop by with her loupe and take a look at this baby, see if it's real. By the way, she added with exaggerated nonchalance as she busied herself scrubbing the already pristine porcelain sink. We're invited to her house for a picnic Saturday. My guard went up. Aunt Gully gave the sink an extra scrub. One of her nephews is coming for a visit. I groaned. Not Brad the baseball nut. No, another one. Aggie lived right next door, so it was difficult and delicate to evade her matchmaking. I'll check my social calendar, I said as we headed out to her van, and try to come up with a believable excuse. Aunt Gully and I swung by Mary Sabino's house on the way into Mystic Bay. A sprawling split level. It took the nautical decor of the area to the extreme. Lobster buoys hung from every available inch on the weathered wood exterior. All the curtains were closed, and a newspaper sat on the front mat. I parked next to a mailbox attached to a 5-foot-tall scale model of the new London Harbor Light. A neighbor peeped over the fence and waved. Gully, is that you? Laurie. Aunt Gully returned the wave and asked about Mary and the ring. Mary's gone to Canada for her grandson's baptism. A fancy ring? Laurie shook her head. I know for a fact they put another mortgage on their house to pay for one of their grandkids' college fees. Besides, they had an anniversary party in the spring. 45 years. I thanked Laurie and turned the van toward the shack. Who else could MS be? I mused. You've got that detective fever again, Aunt Gully teased as we turned onto Pearl Street. I can't tell. Me too. It is nice that it isn't a murder, although her tone was wistful. It has been so quiet this summer. I shook my head. Last summer had been a whirlwind for me. After the accident that broke my ankle and put my dance career on hold, I'd moved back to Mystic Bay while I healed. There'd been several murders in our sleepy village, and I'd somehow become entangled in all of them. Entangled to the point that the Mystic Mariner dubbed me the dancing detective. What I didn't enjoy were all the jokes comparing me to a character in a TV show where a murder happened every time the sleuth showed up. It was killing what little social life I had. The last few months had been murder-free, and I hoped, for Mystic Bay's sake, it stayed that way. I might have been alone. Aggie had bought a police scanner, and, judging from the excitement gleaming in Aunt Gully's big brown eyes, I wondered if Gull's Nest would soon have its own scanner, too. Maybe I was a bad influence. I parked Aunt Gully's van by the kitchen door of the Lazy Mermaid. We'd left up the patriotic bunting from the 4th of July, and Aunt Gully had added a banner to the porch that proclaimed Welcome Triathloners. The life-size wooden mermaid statue by the front door sported a Mystic Bay Tri t-shirt and baseball cap. 2 10-year-old boys, tanned and wiry in oversized t-shirts and board shorts, were busy working on the porch. Bit Marky watered the geraniums in the half-barrels, while his friend Jack swept sand and debris from the mat by the door. Aunt Gully had hired them to police the grounds and gave them a small salary along with what seemed to be their weight in lobster rolls in return. The boys were deep in conversation as Aunt Gully and I greeted them. She hurried inside, but I pulled up short when I heard what they were discussing. Loch Ness Monster, I said. Bit and Jack exchanged a look, then shrugged, deciding I could be trusted with a confidence. "We saw something big and dark in the water this morning, and maybe it was a sea monster," Bit said. Jack spoke with confidence. "All I'm saying is, if there's one Loch Ness monster, there could be another." "When was this?" I asked. "Where were you?" "An hour before dawn," Bit said. 4:20, to be exact. Jack spoke with assurance. I hid a smile. "You were out early?" The boy's words tumbled. "We were fishing, and we saw this dark thing splashing in the water off Kidda Beach. I thought it could have been a harbor seal." Jack shook his head. "Not at this time of the year. They head north when the water gets warm." Bit put his hands on his hips. "If it wasn't the Loch Ness monster, what was it?" I held up a hand. "Wait a sec. What were you guys doing out on the bay in the dark?" The boys looked around, then shared a guilty look. Bit said, "Allie won't tell." "Won't tell what?" I folded my arms. "You didn't, borrow a boat?" "No, it was Jack's dad's Boston whaler. He was cool with it." Bit nodded so vigorously I was certain Jack's father had no idea the boys had taken it. "I'm helping Bit do the Stargazer and fishing badges for Ocean Scouts," Jack said. "We went out around 2 and got home around 5. I recalled the footprints on the beach. The timing would be right. Where did this sea monster go?" "Toward Fox Point. We had to get back, so we didn't follow it." I mulled over what the boys had said as I went inside, put on an apron, and shared news of the ring with our cook, Hector Vieira, and his wife, Hilda, as we did the morning's prep work. Despite the pink lazy mermaid apron with strategically placed shells, Hilda always looked elegant, her dark hair styled in a smooth chignon, her lipstick a classic red. Hector was bald, well over 6 feet tall, and had the rakish air of a good-natured pirate. Hector wagged his eyebrows. "Another mystery for you, Allie." Soon Aunt Gully opened the door to our first customers, and it was all hands on deck as they streamed in. Aggie texted me, Aunt Gully said. She had a burst pipe at her shop, so she's been dealing with that all morning and hasn't gotten over to check the ring yet. But she did post about finding the ring on NeighborNet. She asked all the people who said it's theirs to describe it. Aunt Gully shook her head. "A lot of people are missing rings. They're fishing for a free ring," Hilda scoffed as she set mugs of coffee in front of 2 guys in triathlon t-shirts. Hector emerged from the kitchen and wrapped his arms around his petite wife. "Would you like a big diamond ring, mi amor?" He had to bend his 6-foot frame to rest his cheek against hers. "Not me," Hilda said. "Pearls are this girl's best friend." She turned to show off the pearl studs in her ears. "My pearl." He kissed her cheek and returned to the kitchen. "I'm a lucky woman?" Hilda smiled. "Hector has always bought me gifts I liked. Not what he thought I liked." "Good point," Aunt Gully said. "I have a friend whose husband keeps buying her jewelry, but she'd rather have a Harley." Customers crowded the counter, and as I served them, the sparkling ring wasn't far from my mind. At break time, I hung up my apron. "I have an idea, Aunt Gully," I said. "The ring's so distinctive. I'm going to run up to the jewelers to show them the photo and see if they remember selling it." Hector waggled a finger. "Finders keepers." I smiled. "The ring's not quite my style." Aunt Gully got a faraway look in her eye. "It could be mine." There was one jeweler in our small village, Muse of Mystic. I straightened my spine as I entered the hushed showroom of the elegant shop across from the town green. The whole place was a jewel box itself, replete with blue velvet, sparkling crystal, thick oriental carpets, and the hush of serious money. "May I help you?" A woman about my age, wearing a sophisticated teal silk wrap dress, greeted me. She smiled, but it was carefully calibrated and didn't reach her icy blue eyes. She'd already assessed, correctly, my potential as a customer. I straightened my shoulders to full ballerina mode to exude confidence. "I was hoping you could help me." A gray-haired man in a dark suit emerged from the back of the store, carrying an armful of blue velvet fabric. When he saw me, he stopped short and his eyes widened behind his tortoiseshell glasses. "Why, it's Allegra Larkin." He used my full name, which I only use professionally. Jill, don't you know who this is? Miss Larkin, I'm delighted to meet you. I'm a big fan of your dancing. I'm Jason d'Amboise. Jillian's my niece. He set down the velvet and extended his hand. How can we assist? I shook his hand. Nice to meet you. I showed them the photo I'd taken earlier. Do you recognize this ring? I found it on the beach this morning. I was wondering if maybe your shop sold it and you knew who it belonged to. Jason peered over his glasses. That beauty belongs to Millicent Sutcliffe up on Fox Point. Millicent Sutcliffe. Ms. Jillian shot him a withering look, then turned hard eyes on me. You found this on the beach? What beach? Her tone was so skeptical, I got the message. She thinks I stole it. Kidda Beach. I took a deep breath to calm myself. I'm trying to reunite the ring with the owner. I imagine she's desperate to get it back. I remember selling that ring to Mr. Sutcliffe, I think, 15 years ago, Jason said. We haven't seen the family since we did an insurance appraisal for them in April. That's when Mrs. Sutcliffe had a terrible fall. She was lucky to survive it with only a broken hip, so we dealt with the grandsons. I guess she's back to swimming now. Well, that's great news. Jillian folded her arms. Of course, we'd have to check if it's the same ring. Jason scoffed. That was a custom design piece. Mr. Sutcliffe wanted something no one else had. Jillian's expression softened. Why don't you have a seat and I'll check our records? Just a moment, please. Uncle Jason, why don't you get Miss Larkin something to drink? Jason grinned. My pleasure. Coffee? Tea? I shook my head, still annoyed by Jillian's accusatory tone. I'm fine, thank you. I settled onto a side chair. 2 people came in and Jason excused himself to help them. From his exclamations, it was a newly engaged couple looking for wedding bands. Their chatter faded into background noise as minutes passed. Jillian was taking her sweet time, and my mind wandered. Mrs. Sutcliffe had broken her hip. She lived on Fox Point. Even if she'd recovered well enough to swim, Fox Point had a beautiful sandy beach, and if the ring was any indication, their house might even have its own private stretch of sand. Odd that she'd swim on Kidda Beach. I stood and walked among the cases, admiring the sparkling gems. Finally, Jillian emerged from the back room. If you don't mind waiting there, she said, pointing to a chair by a case of pearl necklaces. Waiting? I said. You said you were checking your records. Did you find anything? She lowered her voice. I hope you won't make a scene. I called Mrs. Sutcliffe and spoke to her grandson. Outside the picture window, a police cruiser pulled to the curb. There was a break-in at their home last night, and her jewelry was stolen, including that ring. She lifted her chin. I've called the police. Having one of your best friends called to arrest you is an interesting experience. I had to give Bronwyn credit. When she entered the shop and saw me with Jillian, she blinked only once. But I was trying to find the owner and return it, I stammered. Jillian didn't respond, just pressed her lips more tightly together. Stay here, Bronwyn said, then asked Jillian to accompany her into the office. A few minutes later, Bronwyn returned and nodded toward the door. I jumped to my feet. I'll take it from here, Bronwyn said to Jillian. She stepped close to me and muttered, This is awkward. Jason and the engaged couple gaped from across the store as Bronwyn escorted me outside. The bride-to-be raised her cell phone to snap a photo as the door closed behind me. I can't believe it. I burst out, indignation and embarrassment heating my face. Jillian thinks I'm a thief? Get in. Bronwyn opened the passenger door of the cruiser, and I complied. She made a phone call as I slid down in my seat and covered my face, praying no one walking by recognized me. At least she let me ride in the front. Bronwyn finished her call, got in the cruiser, and turned to me, her lips curved in a smile. Are you enjoying this? I asked. She resumed her professional expression, but not before I saw the laughter in her gray eyes. You're not under arrest. I just spoke to Chief Brooks. He's headed up to Fox Point to investigate the burglary. He wants me to pick up the ring and take you to the Sutcliffe house. As we drove to Gull's Nest, I filled in Bronwyn on everything that had happened since the discovery of the ring. Bronwyn parked the cruiser in the driveway, and we hurried in the kitchen door. You know, you can't blame Jillian. She saw you with a photo of a ring she knew belonged to someone else. Didn't they tell you it's one of a kind? Then she calls the owner, and they tell her there was a burglary. She slid on a latex glove. I held out the sugar bowl and lifted the lid. Sorry, but it already has my prints, Aggie's, and Aunt Gully's. Bronwyn's eyebrows rose. That is a ring? I set the bowl back on the table and brushed sugar off my fingers. We can't hand it back like that. It needs a box. Bronwyn shook her head. I'll put it in an evidence envelope. Best not to broadcast what we're carrying around. We drove the short distance across a narrow stone causeway into upscale Fox Point. Bronwyn pulled up to a sprawling 3-story home perched on a rocky point overlooking the bay. The home didn't have a private beach, but it did have a spectacular view. In New England fashion, a small sign proclaimed the home's incongruously humble name, Sandy Feet. 2 police vehicles were there, one of them the chief's SUV, blocking in 2 gleaming sports cars and a rust-spotted blue Volvo station wagon with a Yukon sticker on the back window. A silver-haired woman in navy blue pants and a Fox Point Country Club polo shirt stood by the door, bent almost double, her hands clutching the bar of a walker. A tall young woman, her honey blonde hair in a long braid, stood protectively at the older woman's side, while an even taller guy clad in running shorts and a sweaty triathlon t-shirt emerged from the backyard. The older lady straightened and beamed as we approached. Allegra Larkin. I'm Millicent Sutcliffe. Though she looked frail, her voice was strong and musical. Olivia took me to see you dance in the Nutcracker. Oh, it was marvelous. Your dancing was exquisite. And I remember your costume was such a lovely shade of green. It set off your red hair so beautifully. Thank you, Mrs. Sutcliffe. This is Olivia, my granddaughter, and Mark, my grandson, Mrs. Sutcliffe continued. My other grandson, Dustin, is on a bike ride, training for the triathlon. Nice to meet you, I said. This is police trainee Bronwyn Denby. Bronwyn nodded, then said, I'm going to check in with the chief. Excuse me. My grandsons arrived yesterday morning. Mark's also doing the triathlon, Mrs. Sutcliffe said. Olivia's been staying with me while I rehab, till she goes back to college. Mrs. Sutcliffe patted her granddaughter's arm. She plays basketball at UConn. Olivia blushed. Watch out. Gran's my #1 fan. She'll talk your ear off about basketball. Mrs. Sutcliffe's smile faded as we crossed the threshold into the house, passing a security keypad on the wall. I could swear I locked the doors last night. I could swear I keyed in the code. Her voice faltered as her hands tightened on the bar of the walker, and my heart twisted for her. Sometimes you forget, Gran, Mark said, pushing back his sun-streaked blonde hair, his expression soft and affectionate. Want to sit in the sun porch? Mark's bare feet slapped on the pristine blue tile floor as he led the way through a 2-story foyer. He had bandages on his heels and a recently healed scar on his heavily muscled calves. Olivia hovered over her grandmother as she made slow progress down the hallway, past a staircase that led to the gallery on the 2nd floor. I wondered if this was where Mrs. Sutcliffe had fallen. She read my mind. I had a terrible fall in April. I was so lucky that all my grandkids had come to visit me that weekend. I'm so clumsy. I managed to trip on my way downstairs to get a glass of warm milk. Olivia squeezed her grandmother's shoulder, worry evident in her furrowed brow. Mrs. Sutcliffe gave her a smile. Olivia just happened to get up shortly after that, and she found me. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't called the ambulance right away. She insisted that I install this elevator. As we passed the narrow metal door of the elevator, I glanced into a small room off the hallway, an office stuffed with cardboard boxes and teetering stacks of papers. We went through a great room furnished with a massive television, low angular furniture, and an incongruously homey and worn recliner covered with a crocheted afghan. Mrs. Sutcliffe stopped in front of a fireplace topped with a family portrait in which everyone wore matching white pants and blue shirts, posed against a backdrop of ocean and sky. In it, a younger Mrs. Sutcliffe stood tall, next to a bald man with a prominent nose, who didn't look at the camera. Instead, his adoring gaze was turned to her. Next to them was a younger version of the bald man and a woman with Olivia's honey blonde hair. Flanking the four of them were younger versions of Olivia and Mark and another young man, who must have been Mark's brother Dustin. "I'm the only shrimp in the family," Mrs. Sutcliffe laughed. "My husband, Jim, our son, Paul, and his second wife, Ella, Olivia's mom. Sadly, the boy's mom, Robin, died in a boating accident. Jim Sutcliffe. J.S., I thought." We stepped into the sun porch, a room enclosed on three sides by glass walls. French doors overlooked a brick patio open to a spectacular view of the Sound. Just to the north, Kidda Beach was visible. Mark sprawled on a chair at a glass-topped wicker table, scrolling his phone. We took seats, Olivia hovering as Mrs. Sutcliffe settled on her chair. "Lemonade?" Mrs. Sutcliffe said. "No, thank you." "Liv, get me some?" Mark gave his stepsister a crooked smile. She rolled her eyes, but went into the kitchen and returned with a glass for him. Hard-soled shoes clicked across the tiled floor. Then Chief Brooks and Bronwyn joined us. My path had crossed with the chiefs several times in the course of my amateur investigations, and let's just say he hadn't always welcomed my contributions. Bronwyn must have prepared him, because although he wiped perspiration from his rapidly receding hairline, he nodded at me in a friendly way. "Looks like Miss Larkin found one of your rings on the beach," he said. Bronwyn handed Mrs. Sutcliffe the evidence bag. She opened it, and her pale blue eyes welled with tears. "Oh, thank you. Thank you for returning it." Her expression softened as she looked at the gleaming ring. "I can't wear it now because of my arthritis, but I'm glad it's back. I'm giving it to Olivia when she turns 21 next month." Olivia's eyes welled, too. Gran told us last night over dinner. She's going to sell all her other jewelry and donate the money to St. Peter's Soup Kitchen. She threw her arms around her grandmother. "Don't worry, Gran. The police will get the rest of your jewelry back." Mark reached over to squeeze his grandmother's hand. "And even if they don't, it was all insured anyway." Mrs. Sutcliffe raised her hand where a thin band of gold gleamed on her ring finger. "I'm not worried, Mark. Honestly, my wedding band's the only ring that matters to me. Olivia doesn't want my other jewelry, so I'm glad the money from selling it'll go to a good cause." The heavy footsteps of the CSI team thudded overhead. I was sure Mrs. Sutcliffe had already given a statement, but I launched in before the chief could tell me to go away. "When did you realize the ring and your other jewelry was missing?" Olivia and I were making grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. Mrs. Sutcliffe pressed a hand to her forehead when Jillian called from the jewelry store and said, "You found my ring." "Did you take the call?" She shook her head. "Mark did. Dustin was on his bike ride. I heard Mark's voice out here in the sun porch, and then he ran upstairs into my dressing room. Olivia and I went up in the elevator. Mark showed me my jewelry box, the one with my special occasion jewelry. It was empty. Mark said someone must have broken in." Mark pointed at the French doors that led to a patio. "I noticed those doors were unlocked this morning. The thief must have gotten in that way." Mrs. Sutcliffe frowned. "And I slept in the recliner by the TV last night. I get insomnia and sleep there some nights. I can't believe I didn't hear the thief go right past me upstairs into my bedroom." A guy who was a carbon copy of the one sitting at the table opened the door from the patio and entered. "Take off those shoes, young man," Mrs. Sutcliffe said with mock seriousness. "You track sand all over the house." Humor flashed in his blue eyes. "Yes, Gran. That's Dustin, Mark's twin. He's quite an athlete." Mrs. Sutcliffe smiled. "He's been training for triathlons since he graduated from college." Dustin took off his shoes and dropped them on a mat that was already full of high-tech running and bike shoes. Mark nodded his head toward me. "Gran got a ring back from Allegra, here. That's great news." Dustin gave his grandmother a kiss on the cheek and smiled at me. "Thank you, Ms. Larkin." "Ma'am," Chief Brooks said, We'll have the report done later today. You'll just have to work with your insurance company. Mark said, I've gotten the papers together, Gran. Thank you, dear. The chief cleared his throat, and I took that as my cue to leave. I'll give Allie a ride back, Bronwyn said. A look of relief crossed the chief's face, and I tried not to laugh. Olivia stood. I'll see you out. As we walked to the door, I asked, by the way, what jeweler did your grandmother use for the insurance appraisal? I knew the answer, but wanted to confirm. Olivia said, Muse in Mystic. Mark's girlfriend, Jillian, works there. Back in the cruiser, I turned to Bronwyn. Doesn't it all seem off to you? The thief passed right by a woman with insomnia and she didn't wake up? You could hear everyone's footsteps on that tile floor. And the thief struck on the night she conveniently forgot to arm the security system. Bronwyn ran her hand through her pixie-cut brown hair as we drove out of Fox Point. It was a gesture she made when she was stressed or thinking hard. Mark made a point of saying she was forgetful, but she seemed pretty sharp to me. Although I hesitated, she didn't notice the jewelry was taken when she got dressed. It was her special occasion stuff, Bronwyn said. She has 2 jewelry boxes, and both were closed when she dressed this morning. She told the chief nothing upstairs was disturbed at all. I folded my arms. So the thief knew where to look. Bronwyn threw me a shrewd look. Yep. My cell phone buzzed at the same time the police radio squawked. Break-in. 22 Mermaid Lane. 22 Mermaid Lane? Shock lanced through me. That's my dad's house. Isn't your dad sailing with Esmeralda in the Caribbean? Bronwyn spun the wheel. I was too stunned to do more than nod. Bronwyn keyed the mic. On my way? She threw me a glance. Don't freak. I'll check it out. With all the people in town training for the triathlon, we're getting a lot of trespassing calls. Some of the runners get lost and cut through yards. Her voice was steady, but she ran a hand through her hair again. We pulled up to the house I'd grown up in, a brown cedar shingled Dutch colonial with a small burntwood sign that Dad had carved when I was a little girl. It read, Mermaid Motel. I'd moved in with Aunt Gully a few years back, giving Dad his space, when he finally started dating 28 years after my mom passed away. He'd met his girlfriend, Esmeralda, when she'd hired him to pilot her yacht into Mystic Bay. A woman with glossy brown hair styled in a sleek bob waved from the cottage next door, her black and white beagle mix barking as I jumped from the car before Bronwyn could kill the engine. Allie, Ms. Goffman? Jingle started barking about an hour ago when I was streaming my soaps, and when I looked out I didn't see anyone. But now I realize your dad's back door's been banging in the breeze, and what with your dad and Esmeralda gone, I thought it could be a burglary. She paused for a deep breath. I'm sorry I didn't check sooner. I appreciate it. We'll check it out. Bronwyn and I ran through the yard and up the back steps. The screws that held the screen door's top hasp anchored to the wall had been pulled out and the door hung crookedly. Someone yanked the door so hard they pulled it off the hinges. The inner door was ajar and scratches marred the wood beside the knob. My body heated with anger and adrenaline. They kicked in the door. Stay here, Bronwyn muttered as she entered. I snorted, but gave Bronwyn a few seconds head start into the house. I knew this house so well. I listened to the familiar sounds of gulls squawking and wind chimes ringing on the front porch. I didn't sense any unusual presence, but still my heart rate ticked up. I stepped inside and heard the tap of Bronwyn's police-issued shoes as she ran upstairs. I froze. The kitchen cabinets and drawers hung open. Esmeralda's cookbooks were strewn over the floor, and her herb plants had been knocked from the windowsill. My heart hammered in my throat as I ran upstairs. The bedroom bureaus had also been ransacked, with clothes pulled from the drawers and Esmeralda's trinket boxes upended. She kept her good jewelry in a safe deposit box, and, judging from the size of the pile of Esmeralda's everyday jewelry, the thief hadn't been tempted by any of the rainbow-hued bangles and beads Esmeralda favored. Bronwyn panted behind me as I picked up socks and t-shirts. Wait. Let me make sure the house is clear. I heard her run through the rest of the house, opening and closing closet doors. Shock gave way to anger. Then gratitude that both Dad and Esmeralda were safe on the yacht. There was little here for a thief to take beyond Esmeralda's costume jewelry and clothes, and Dad's flannel shirts and fishing tackle, and nothing appeared to be missing. Bronwyn pulled me downstairs, and we went into the kitchen. "Does your dad have a doorbell camera?" I shook my head as I gathered cookbooks from the floor. "The only reason people around here get cameras is to watch for foxes or birds. Besides, Ms. Goffman's the neighborhood watch. Too bad this break-in happened during her soaps." Bronwyn took photos as I righted the plants and swept up spilled soil, my mind whirling as I rattled off everything that had bothered me about the visit to Sandy Feet. "Didn't Sandy Feet have security cameras?" I asked. "Captain Brooks checked first thing," Bronwyn said. "The camera in the back of the house had some debris on the lens, so the video was obscured." Convenient. I walked through the living room to the front window that overlooked the ocean. "Most houses in Fox Point have security cameras, right?" Bronwyn joined me. "Practically every single one." "Tell me what you're thinking." Mentally, I retraced the route from Mrs. Sutcliffe's magnificent oceanfront home to Kidda Beach. Kidda Beach is the first beach you come to when you leave Fox Point. I remembered Bit and Jack's Loch Ness Monster. "Remember the footprints I saw on the beach?" Her forehead wrinkled. "You think the thief swam away with the jewelry? That's nuts. You'd take a chance on losing some." I raised my eyebrows. After a moment, her eyebrows popped, too. "Unless you want to lose it," I said. My phone buzzed. "Hi, Aunt Gully. You didn't answer the texts I sent," she said. "You're not upset about Aggie's picnic, are you? This nephew's not bad." "No, that's not it," Aunt Gully gasped when I told her about the break-in. "Don't worry. I don't think anything was taken. I'll come over later to help set things right," she said. "I texted to tell you that Aggie called. She did come over this morning and checked out the ring with her loop, but with the plumbing emergency, she didn't have a chance to call me until now. You're not going to believe this." As I listened, I felt pieces fall together. "Actually, Aunt Gully, I do believe it. I'll talk to you later," Bronwyn said. "What is it?" "I know that look on your face. You figured something out." I slid the phone back into my pocket. Aggie examined the ring. "The diamond is fake. Ms. Goffman was waiting for us, sweeping her tidy front walk where not a bit of sand was to be found. Jingle loped over for a pat, and I obliged him. Ms. Goffman, remind me, when did Jingle start barking?" I asked. She squinted. "Little more than an hour ago. Hour and a half. We thanked her and got in a car." "Bronwyn, where were we a little more than an hour ago?" She slid on sunglasses and pulled from the curb. "I was picking you up at Muse. More specifically, an employee at Muse was making a phone call. I searched on my phone. If you look up my address, there isn't a listing because..." Bronwyn jumped in. "You live with Aunt Gully, whose last name's Fontana." "Yep," I said. "The only listing for a Larkin is Dad's." "All this for a fake ring?" Bronwyn shook her head. I nodded. "I have to talk to the chief." Aunt Gully's news put everything in focus. As Bronwyn drove, I walked through the reasons for my theory. Mrs. Sutcliffe's announcement of her decision to donate her jewelry. Mrs. Sutcliffe's insomnia. Large footprints running into the water. None returning. Bit and Jack's Loch Ness Monster splashing off Kidda Beach. As the cruiser sped past Kidda Beach, Bronwyn said, "So they had to get that ring back before anyone could discover it was a fake and that it was part of an insurance scam. And hide the fact that Mark sold the original pieces and replaced them with copies," I said. "The thief didn't want the jewelry. The thief was swimming the jewelry out to drop it onto the bottom of the ocean because Millicent Sutcliffe announced she planned to give the ring to Olivia for her birthday and sell the other pieces to give to charity. At that point, someone would discover that Mrs. Sutcliffe's gems were replaced with fakes. So Jillian and Mark aren't on it," Bronwyn said. "Do you think Dustin's involved?" I turned to her. "Did you notice that Dustin knew my last name even though no one had mentioned it?" "Maybe he's a ballet fan," Bronwyn said. I snorted. "Kidder," Bronwyn said, "I'm serious." Okay, so how did he know? When the accomplice called from the jewelry store, I said. Jillian? But Mark took the call from Jillian. I nodded. And Mark told Dustin that Allegra Larkin had the ring. That's how Jillian's uncle introduced me. Dustin took off on his bike to the only house in Mystic Bay owned by a Larkin and Broken, setting off poor Jingle. Dustin didn't find anything, so he biked home where we were all cozily chatting on the sun porch. He took off his shoes, very large shoes by the way, and put them in the pile by the door. But everything's circumstantial, Bronwyn said. There has to be some physical evidence that links the brothers to the theft. I remembered the footprints in the sand. The footprints in the sand? I took a photo. She shrugged. It's not against the law to go for a swim. I wonder which one actually did the theft. I remembered the blisters on Mark's heels. I grabbed Bronwyn's arm. Bronwyn, go to Kidda Beach. She spun the cruiser into a U-turn. Surely Mark hadn't run barefoot from Fox Point to Kidda Beach. I didn't see any shoes left behind on Kidda Beach this morning when I found the ring. Shoes would have been too heavy to swim in. He'd have to leave them somewhere near the beach. When I saw Mark at Sandy Feet, he had blisters on his heels. He must have used a new pair of running shoes this morning, and they gave him blisters. Bronwyn parked the cruiser by the path to Kidda Beach, and we ran to the dented metal trash can by the outdoor shower. I lifted the lid. Among the discarded pizza boxes, ice cream wrappers, and bottles was a pair of very large running shoes. Later that day after her shift, Bronwyn joined me at Kidda Beach. We spread beach towels on the warm sand and I covered myself with sunscreen, an oversized t-shirt, and a broad-brimmed hat, the lot of a redhead at the beach. I sipped some of Aunt Gully's homemade lemonade and watched a flotilla of rowboats, kayaks, and dinghies converge at the base of Fox Point. Aggie's post on NeighborNet and news of the missing jewelry had set off a treasure hunt. Judging from all the boats, people didn't care that the jewelry was fake. I shaded my eyes and watched as Bit and Jack's Boston whaler pulled up to the crowd of boats and dropped anchor. Chief Brooks told me to thank you, Bronwyn said. He thought the whole theft at Sandy Feet was a little too tidy. The security camera conveniently obscured, the thief passing right by Mrs. Sutcliffe on a tile floor, then knowing precisely where to get the jewels, and so on. He said that you finding the ring rattled Mark and Dustin into making their big mistake. I nodded. The break-in at Dad's house. When the chief returned to Sandy Feet to question them, Mark and Dustin didn't lose any time trying to implicate each other. Bronwyn sipped from her water bottle, and I noticed a scratch on her wrist. What happened? Bronwyn adjusted her sunglasses. Jillian wasn't exactly cooperative when I arrested her. I shook my head. It's the job? Bronwyn shrugged. So Jillian was in a relationship with Mark. Mark knew that his grandmother wanted to sell her jewelry and give the proceeds to the soup kitchen. He took his grandmother's jewelry to Jillian for an insurance appraisal, and while it was in her possession, she had the jewelry copied. She returned the fakes, and the two of them sold the real pieces for a tidy sum. I recalled the brothers' sports cars. But Dustin found out and wanted in on the action. Then Mrs. Sutcliffe announced last night that she was giving Olivia her ring as a birthday present. They couldn't take a chance of Olivia finding out the ring was fake. Exactly, Bronwyn said. Plus, I continued, if the fake jewels were stolen, they could put in the insurance claim. That way they'd get the insurance money and hide their theft. Win-win. I sat up and rested my chin on my knees. Something else bothers me. Mrs. Sutcliffe's fall. I wonder if that fall wasn't accidental. Bronwyn frowned. It's a good thing those guys won't be spending too much time with their grandmother in the future. Bit and Jack dived off the whaler. I hoped they'd find something on the ocean floor. Bronwyn applied sunscreen to her legs. Anyway, finding Mark's footprints and shoes foiled their plan. I sipped my drink. Actually, you know who really did? Aggie Weatherburn. She's the one who confirmed the ring was fake. Gotta give her credit. Bronwyn looked down the beach and jutted her chin. Speak of the devil. I turned and saw Aggie and Aunt Gully walking down the sand, flanking a tall guy who was so good-looking I almost dropped my drink. Whoa, Bronwyn whispered. I hope that's a nephew. Aunt Gully lowered her sunglasses, caught my eye, and winked. I think I'm going to a picnic on Saturday, I said.